Steve from Oldham, and I look after a number of different areas, one of which is having a very close look at personal data, which has become a hot topic at the moment because of the privacy issues that are raised by the collection of personal data and the use of it for targeted advertising, and now obviously more recently the use of it by various governments to make sure that I suppose we're behaving ourselves effectively. It's a very, very big area that's well worth taking a close look at. So I'll skip through some of the slides to some of the more important ones so that we can get to the important parts. This is basically the ecosystem as it stands at the moment for personal data. So if you look at the top where personal data is, it's connected devices and browsers through cookies, collect our personal data, websites utilize that personal data and get permission through their privacy policy in yellow to use tracking technology like cookies to collect our personal data, which is analyzed in a big data analytics solution, and then is fed back to, as you see at the bottom, various business types or organizations, ad networks, big data services, and governments, states. Funded by advertisers who pay money, obviously, for targeted advertising, because targeted advertising has been proven to give higher returns than contextual advertising. So the user, the internet user, has become the product on the internet, because that is the product that Google sell and Facebook sell to their customers and their clients, the advertisers. And you can see the difference between the blue and the grey here is that the grey is corporately or corporation controlled, because the privacy policies are written by corporations to be wholly advantageous to them and not advantageous to us necessarily at all. So the only part that the consumer controls is the personal data that they have, the connected device they have, and the browser that they choose. But they can't necessarily control what data is taken from them, because that is done through the legal contracts that are found in the privacy policies. If we move on a little bit to another interesting slide. Excuse me. This one's showing what's actually happening to the personal data ecosystem. Now, as I said, the way personal data flows is it goes through cookies via the browser. It gets collected by lots of big data collectors, including Google and Facebook, and actually a big list of businesses you may never have heard of from a consumer point of view. Axiom, Datalogics, BlueKai, Epsilon, a number of companies that you probably never heard of, but actually collect data on a lot of different populations around the world and put it together to create a consumer profile that they then sell to companies who want to target advertising. So number one, what's happening is there are numerous privacy infringements and errors and breaches of security which occur on a regular basis, and obviously the most topical one recently is in the bottom left-hand corner called PRISM, which I'm sure you've all read about because it's big news, and basically it's where the big internet giants, Facebook, Apple, Google and many others, Microsoft, have signed up to a PRISM service, which actually means they deliver all of the data they collect about us to the US government. So that the US government can, under the terrorist laws, can check for national security issues. Now, that is a big story, and that drives, as in the middle, the privacy market, which is getting hotter, it's getting bigger, because all of those companies that I show in the middle there, Personal, DuckDuckGo, Tor, Avine, Allow, all of those, including Mozilla and Internet Explorer, they are all getting involved in the privacy market, creating tools that allow you to block the tracking of your personal data and prevent cookies from analysing and collecting your data. All of these privacy infringements and situations that are occurring are increasingly, the angry faces in the top left-hand corner are consumers whose attitudes are hardening. We have evidence in the research that we've done, which I can show you a little bit further down the presentation. 66% of people that were interviewed across 11 countries said that they would use a blocking tool if it was easy to use and they could get hold of one. So that's 2/3 of the internet population would prevent Google, DoubleClick, Facebook and the like collecting data in order that they could target adverts at them. Obviously, this survey was done before PRISM, so what that figure is now is anyone's guess. It can be quite large. Thirdly, number 3, especially in Europe, but also in North America, and these are the 2 areas I have to admit I've studied most, but there are a number of countries in the Asia Pacific who are also looking at this situation in terms of regulation. The European regulations and standards are tightening very strongly. They are doing things like insisting that the user has a right of data portability. That means that they have a right to go to Facebook and say, I want all of my data, including all the pictures and all those things, download it to me in a usable format, so effectively I could go over to another social network and upload all of my information to another social network. So that's one of the rights that's being guaranteed. Also, another right under European regulation that's being discussed at the moment is something called explicit consent, whereby a website or an online business would have to get explicit consent for collecting data, rather than just saying in their policy, if you use this website, we will collect your data. They will have to actually have a little box that pops up and says, do you or don't you, so that you have an obvious choice. Now, Europe already has certain new cookie rules, which has a pop-up that comes up and says the cookies are used on this website, this is what they're used for, and making everyone aware that cookies are being used. So even people that weren't aware that cookies even existed before, which there were probably quite a few of them, they now know in Europe that all websites use cookies to collect your data. So those regulations are getting tighter. The internet giants, I talk about Facebook and Google specifically, but others too, Microsoft as well. Even though cookies are being blocked, they are creating countermeasures for that. They can now identify individuals not just by looking at the information from cookies, but from new technology practices like browser fingerprinting. The way we all set up our browsers, and actually this is also true of the way we set up our mobile phones in terms of all the different things we have on a mobile phone and the way we set it up, is very specific to us. It's almost unique because there are so many variables on your mobile phone for you to set, and because on a browser there are so many variables for you to set, the search history and such like, it becomes a unique fingerprint of you. And so what Google are starting to do is they're starting to use browser fingerprinting to identify individuals rather than using information from cookies. So that, and the knowledge that that's going on, is driving again a reaction from the users
to use more privacy tools and more privacy products to block the collection of their data. And then the final one, number 5, is that government surveillance is growing, and actually in North America and Europe is far greater than the population of those areas ever possibly imagined, which has created a strong response against government surveillance. So the response to that is, in number 6 on the right, is that the disruption of the corporation-controlled personal data ecosystem is happening. Individual users of the internet are using privacy tools to stop the big users of personal data from collecting their data. Now, if too many people do that, if 66% that we talked about actually did block their data, Google would virtually go out of business because they've got nothing to sell. They would have to go back to contextual advertising. When I say go out of business, that's probably an overstatement. They would have to resort to less efficient ways of making money, and that would impact heavily their revenues and their share price. So the disruption of corporate controlled, and the whole internet is effectively corporate control because it's all based and based on the legal right that they put down in the privacy policy to collect your data. So what's actually happening on top of privacy tools, just the little applications you use to block cookies, there are new ideas emerging around user-controlled personal data ecosystems. Now, what happens in this instance is instead of a user not having any control over the collection of their data, they can block completely the collection of their data by anyone they so choose, and then they can put their own data into a personal data vault. So you can talk about the things that you're going to do in the future, the preferences you've got, the things you're shopping for, something you might like a quote for, into a personal data vault, and the individual vendors and Googles and Facebooks, if they want your data, they have to effectively knock at the door and ask permission for you to get it, for them to get it. Now, that's creating a system that consumer is entirely in control of their own personal data. So if you don't like Google for some reason, you can say Google can't have it, but I love Facebook, so they can have it. It's a question of maybe who you trust. Now, this is a very small ecosystem at the moment, but it's growing gradually, and obviously every time it's a privacy infringement, every time a government, a company, a bit like Google's Street View cars that collected data that they shouldn't have been collecting, a bit like Facebook and the Instagram situation whereby they were going to change the rights of individuals who used Instagram, the photographic application, and they were going to say we can use your data without your permission, these sorts of things. They eventually changed that, but there will always be privacy infringements that upset the populace and the consumers, and that's driving quite a healthy privacy market in privacy tools. So if we go on to another slide just to show you some figures. This is a slide on the actual figures on user attitudes. 75%, and this is across 11 countries, so I'm not giving you individual countries. We've got a set of countries which include all the BRIC nations. It includes France, Germany, the US, UK, Japan, India, so a number of countries across the world. 75% of the responders said that they were aware that their data was being tracked. 50% believe that the people collecting the data, the companies collecting the data, the websites, were not honest. And actually only 14% said that they did actually trust them. We wanted to know if the users understood how important their personal data was to the existence of the internet, virtually. So how reliant they were on data. And 46% felt that it was definitely true, or true for most companies, that they were entirely reliant on personal data. So even though they understand the importance of personal data to the internet, they're still, 66% of them are still happy to block tracking. And there are different figures, very slightly, between people that would block a search engine, 66%, 68% said they'd block a social network, so that's obviously Facebook they're thinking of in many instances. And 62%, much lower figure, said they'd block your average website. So obviously I think people have got a brand in their head that they wish to block rather than websites across the board, although 62% is still a high figure. So we have a situation where there is a growing privacy market because there are continual infringements against the consumer's privacy. So what could happen, and what we believe will slowly begin to happen, is that the bottom section here is the incumbent system for collecting personal data. It's the corporation control system for collecting personal data. It's cookie-based. It's dominated by all the corporations that operate on the internet, the OTT players. It uses our data to estimate, using historical data, what we're going to do in the future. Okay, so that's quite important. It's at very best real time, but mostly even fast analytics is looking at what you've done in the past, and it's not looking at what you're saying you're going to do in the future, because they don't know that. So they are estimating what your preferences and your needs are. It's based on an advertising model. A lot of revenues on the internet are based around ad-supported free services, and that is absolutely essential to the internet economy. And it's based on corporate written contracts, not contracts that were written by you or me, but written by a business. Now, if you look at the top half of this diagram, we're looking at an emerging system, which is still quite small at the moment, but if you go back, I'll go back to that slide with all those company logos in, that's where it's been born, and these new personal data vaults, these blocking tools, these other services, privacy services are being offered from those groups of companies. And this is led by, this particular ecosystem is not controlled by OTT players, it's controlled by trusted personal data gatekeepers. They are those privacy companies who are out there to sell you privacy goods and services, and therefore their whole belief and reason for living is to be trusted, because that's the only way they're going to sell you. So these are companies that base their revenues on being trusted companies. They're the ones that are creating the personal data vaults, which they offer you. You don't have to put anything in these personal data vaults at all, but there are potential benefits from doing so. You may get better discounts from a company. You may get an easier way of getting the best deal rather than searching the internet from top to bottom. This particular system looks at users' actual intentions, because if you put something in this personal data vault to say, actually, I'm interested in buying a new car, I want to spend this amount of money, and this is what it looks like, then they know there's a preference and an intention to purchase something. The companies that are linked to this personal data vault system, you will accept which companies you want to look at. You allow to look at that, and they will come back to you with their best offer for product or service. So it's not looking at your estimated intentions, it's looking at your actual intentions, your future intentions, because that's what you've written down. Now, we know that targeted advertising is about 7 times more effective in terms of click-through than contextual advertising. And that's based on historic estimates of what they think your preferences are. If you then say that this new system is offering something that you have actually said you want, how many times better is that going to be than targeted advertising? Even better, should be. So, in other words, more valuable. So more money coming into, per head, coming into the top system than the bottom system. So maybe a little bit of money that can be shared with the consumer. Maybe on top of that, a little bit of extra discount from services because of the power that this particular new system gives the user rather than the corporation. In this instance, we adopt a contract from one of these privacy companies who says, look, we've got lawyers who've written out a number of different contracts and you can just adopt one. You know, you've got a list here or you can write your own, you know. And any user, any corporation that comes and wants to take data from that has to look. So, you know, the power is on the other side of the coin. You know, it's now the user which is demanding the corporation read their contract rather than the other way around. Makes a change. So it's kind of rebalancing the internet in a way which is fairer to the consumer. If we actually look at a bit of detail on, excuse me, on a bit more detail about what's being offered in that, it might give you a richer feeling of what experience you could see. And there are things going on the internet that users just don't understand. It's complicated stuff, they don't really know how it works, and none of it is legal. And I have to own up to being a business advisor. So when I'm advising a company, you know, you're a regulator, but when I'm advising a company, I say to them, absolutely, do anything that's not illegal. But don't moralize about whether you think it's nice or nasty. If it's legal, do it because it makes good money. Okay, that's my advice. But I will say on top of that, there could be consequences if the user doesn't like the way you play the game. And they might run away from you. So that you have to be careful of that. Now, within this new world where the consumer is gradually getting more transparency of what corporations are doing and more tools to stop them doing it, then obviously it's important for companies to understand their consumers and be friends with them, you know, not just use their data without asking, but have an engaging relationship with their users rather than just take their data and use it to target them ads to get money, you know, because if those consumers walk away, they're not going to get them back. So in this new privacy market, there are tools that can block tracking. There are personal data vaults where you can load up your data. There are also opportunities, especially for telcos actually, to get involved in ID verification. So instead of putting yet another username and yet another password into a particular website to sort of operate the service, instead of having to put Facebook in again and giving them all your data as well, then there is an opportunity for telcos to become ID verifiers, whereby there's a new system where you put a telco, maybe your mobile number, for example, or some other a figure which is some other username which is not related to Facebook, and is a standard username for all of your services. If I actually go through to the next slide that explains these in detail, excuse me. So we've gone through the first one, personal data vaults and ID verification.
So the fact that you've loaded your information onto a personal data vault allows you to sell or broker data to ad networks. So the companies that are hosting the personal data vault on a platform can help you get better deals because they're using the whole platform's buying power. So all of the users on the network on that platform of personal data vaults, the people operating that can go out and get benefits and deals for millions and millions of users. So that is going to attract a lot of attention from the user in terms of network effects and fast growth in the platform, and from a lot of vendors who go, hold on a second, you know, I used to get all my leads of people interested in my services through advertising on Google DoubleClick. Now what they're saying is there are people that have put all their requirements down, you know, in a personal data vault, and I can go and read them if I get their permission. So hey, I'm going to do that, you know, because not only is it not, it's a shorter system. It's not advertising and then hoping that you're going to get a response. You know who's interested in what. You know, they'll be able to read a report and see how many people were interested in buying a car between this amount of money and that amount of money. They'll be able to see, you know, who wants to move to a different part of the country and needs estate agents or a loan. So, you know, these personal data exchanges could offer companies and users on the system some serious benefits. So you could just put, it's effectively an RFP. You could put a consumer RFP down in your personal data vault that says, yep, I'm up for buying a small shop in, you know, such and such a town because I'm changing careers. You know, who's got anything to offer? And they will come back to you. There are companies in the privacy market that are actually going out there and deleting you wherever they can find you. You know, you've heard the stories about people looking at Facebook and other social networks before recruiting you because they want to work out what sort of person you are. Now, when we're young especially, we make all sorts of silly mistakes, and that's a little bit unfair if we get judged on that. So reputation management companies in the privacy market are going out there and scrubbing your name from as many things as you tell them to scrub, if they can. You know, they're giving no guarantees, but after all, if you're going to block something because you don't trust what people are going to do with the data, you might as well start from a blank canvas. You know, otherwise there's still that historic data about you out there in the market. So the reputation management is another thing that's being offered. This is probably on the top right hand corner, it's probably one of the things that is least understood, and that is it's called yield optimization when you look at it from a corporation's viewpoint. So what they do, for example, is because of all the big data analytics out there, they know that worldwide Mac users spend more money than any other kind of PC user. I don't know why that is, but you know, maybe Macs are more expensive, or they're cooler, or they're generally owned by people I don't know who have more money. But they consider that Mac users spend more money than non-Mac users. So if they can see that your IP address is a Mac IP address, they know that they can present you with slightly more expensive products because they know you're more likely to buy. You're as likely to buy them, or more likely to buy them than PC users. So, for example, what they could do is they could next time you're maybe searching through a website like Luxury Hotels of the World or some network of luxury hotels, they could automatically present you with most of the rooms available, but maybe miss out promotions for the cheaper rooms, and maybe miss out the cheapest rooms. So they're not lying. The price is not being changed. They're just not giving you the best deal for you. They're giving you the best deal for them. So they're optimizing you as a consumer lifetime value proposition, and that's the way they think.
They're thinking en masse, optimizing the consumer for maximizing lifetime value. Now, you will never know, and actually maybe you never care that that was done to you, but whether it's you feel it's right or not is another matter. And actually, maybe you did that month, even though you're a rich Mac user, maybe that month you did want to spend a little less, and you didn't get the best deal. Back in 2000, Amazon actually tried variable pricing, dynamic pricing, they call it. And they actually priced books differently for different users, depending on what they knew about that user. So they tried charging people that were wealthier and maybe living in a wealthier part of the town. They charged them more money for a book than they did somebody from another part of town, for example. And they were found out, and they got in a lot of trouble from the law because that is an unfavourable practice. But they did try it, and that's the thing about the internet. You can do anything on it. The corporations can do anything on it, and therefore they will. Anti-optimization from a privacy point of view is making sure that you're not being optimized, that you will get that cheaper price room, and that the methods that are used to, because this is called personalization from the corporation's viewpoint. They say that we're going to personalize this website or this service for you. And everyone thinks, oh great, that's fantastic, it's going to be personalized and it's going to be just what I want. But actually, it's not just being personalized for your needs, it's being personalized for their profits as well. And that's something perhaps that a lot of people don't particularly get. I can't even value how big the situation that is, but the more big data analytics is used, and you know that big data analytics is the big hot topic, and the more companies that utilize that will be optimizing us for customer lifetime value. So they will be making sure that the setup of the website, the promotions on the website are all directed at us so that we spend as much money as possible. So if I'm a lower income user, they will know something in the big data will tell them that, and they will make sure that they present me with extra discounts or lower prices, not for exact topics, but extra discounts. And other users who use the same website won't get those offers because the big data tells the users that they don't need to offer those discounts to get in business. Self-analytics, this is already happening in the UK. The government the European Union has created a law which has not gone through the Parliament yet, but will do very soon. It's called the right to data portability. It means that you should be able to go to any website or any company that has taken your data, and you should be able to get it all given back to you in a usable format, and also for them to stop collecting it from that time onwards. What Tesco's, the supermarket in the UK have done, is they have turned that into an advantage for themselves, not a disadvantage. What they're actually doing is they have a club card, a supermarket discount card, which is very popular with Tesco's customers, where they collect all the information about what you buy, so that you can build up points for discounts and all sorts of things, and it's very successful, and lots of supermarkets do this worldwide. Now, what Tesco's are doing is it's almost a gamification of the club card. They're making it more fun. They're feeding you back your analytics in an application, saying that if you've been a Tesco customer for the last 5 years, 10 years, whatever, you can analyse what you bought. Or you can say, okay, so do I buy more chocolate than average? do I effectively purchase more calories or more sugar, or what sort of wine am I buying? Am I buying the same sort of wine as the next guy? There's lots of and obviously it's anonymous, it's an average of how much is bought. But there's some interesting things that allow people to play with their own analytics of their shopping, which people will play with because it's quite interesting, it's quite fun. Basing yourselves on what everyone else is doing, because people are interested in that. And it's called self-analytics, and it's something that gamifies data, and it's being given back to the consumer, so it's quite positive in that respect. And it's another service that the privacy market is starting to offer. That's a very simple one. We all hate filling out forms. The answer would be fill it out once, and then you never have to fill out a form again because you just press a button and it all happens automatically. This is something that hasn't happened yet, which is actually something that I think will happen. It's my own insight, having done the research. And that is, if we go back to this diagram here, the blue arrow in the middle is effectively one of the things you can also do, as well as creating your personal data vaults. Because these two ecosystems are going to exist together for many, many years, or forever, to be honest, there could be, instead of just being any old cookie that takes your data, you could sign yourself up to say, right, I will only allow my browser to allow a cookie that I trust, a branded, trusted cookie, which is presented to you by a company that you trust. And you say, only that cookie can collect my data and no others. So whoever controls that particular trusted branded cookie is the one that gets all the data. It can be automatically funneled into your personal data vault. It makes your personal data vault more valuable. If you aggregate millions and millions of personal data vaults together, then you are pulling you are game changing the bottom corporation-controlled ecosystem, and the likes of Google and others have got a problem because the business has gone somewhere else. It's a disruptive way of making money. And it's probably no surprises that actually the type of companies that are most likely to be accepted in this area are telcos. Telcos, in relation to some of the big international internet giants, are more trusted comparatively than they are. So there is an opportunity for telcos to get involved in being the privacy champion of users, because they have a lot of their users' data anyway, and actually they don't generally use it the way the internet uses it. So they have actually got, telcos have got an advantage in this area, and if they got involved in this new personal data ecosystem, they could not only push it forward because of the reach and penetration that telcos have, but they can make it quite valuable for themselves as well, because there are lots of, as you've seen, services that can be offered and bundled, and it's a double benefit, because they gain revenues that are also taken away from the OTT threat, the internet threat. So for telcos, this is quite an interesting, very strategic move, but all the same, there are already telcos looking interestedly at this. Swisscom is one of them who is signed up to one of the personal data vaults. The vendor community selling into telcos are already making personal data vaults, the ID verification solutions. They're already being started to sell them into the telco industry. That is the main story, really, about personal data. It's based around the fact that gradually but surely users are becoming more distrustful of corporations and governments collecting their data, and will increasingly, as they get presented with more and more interesting privacy services from the privacy market, start using them. And as they start using them, their data will become invisible to the normal route of collecting data through cookies. and therefore there's an opportunity for telcos, for example, and others as well, to game change the incumbent dominating internet players like Google and Facebook by creating a new ecosystem completely and being the gatekeeper of that ecosystem. One of the final things here that's quite interesting as well is that I often get asked about, because we're a number of different people, aren't we? We're not just, let me go back to another interesting slide in the beginning which I'm going to show you. We're not just one person. We're lots of people. The real person is the citizen, the consumer, the worker, the friend, the relation, the mum, the dad, the sister. We're all one person, but we are different in each of those respects. We're a different person at work because we're a professional. We're a different person, when you're with your parents than when you're with your children. We're different people. And also we have all these internet personas, the little blue one, the WhatsApp username, the Line username, the Cow Talk username. We lose track, don't we, of all these different digital persona, internet persona that we have. And out there amongst Google and Facebook and many, many, many others, just think about the hundreds of companies that are building a consumer profile about each of us so that they can sell us to an advertiser. So that's an ad profile. So there's lots of those because lots of companies are doing it. And then there's a government file. Certainly after the prison revelations, there's a government file potentially about you. I mean, not necessarily definitely, but we don't know what they're doing with it. So maybe there is. Maybe it's a profile for every single member of the population. There is now the power in analytics and in data solutions and storage not to bother about just collecting a few people. You might as well profile your whole population if you're a government. It can be done easily. So we're lots of different people. And so when it comes to wanting to block Google and wanting to block others, we may actually we get told a lot by governments, don't do that, because what we want to do is we want to help society by analysing, for example, the health of Malaysia and understanding where the issues are and how they can be fixed, because we've got a massive population it's no longer sampling a population, it's analysing the whole population. But they need permission, maybe, to use your medical records. So, if you were blocking any kind of data extraction, you would be stopping the citizen side of you from offering your medical data to help society in your country as a whole. And maybe actually you don't want to do that. You don't actually quite like the idea of that. So, in future, we maybe need to start thinking about, instead of being taxed money, maybe we should be taxed, as a law, maybe we should be taxed certain personal data because it helps society in general. So maybe we should be taxed our medical data in order that we can help society in general. There are issues with all of this because obviously insurance companies, if they can get hold of that data, will use it. They will start deciding who are the cases that are going to have the early heart attacks, and they'll be giving you higher insurance premiums, and you won't be any the wiser because you don't know what the other guy's getting. The insurance industry could be one of the most scariest because they're the ones that could change what they're charging you because of what they know about you. If they've analysed they may spot that you drink a lot. They may spot, not in this country maybe, but they may spot you smoke too much. There's things that they might identify. They may identify that your parents, I don't know, both died of a heart attack when they were younger, and there might be some. So there's lots of opportunities for insurance companies optimize you for your consumer lifetime value. So maybe personal data should be a donation or a tax that you offer the government to benefit your society and your comrades, you know, and your friends and your people, you know, as a way of improving things. But the bottom line is that, you know, personal data is, now that Google and Facebook have merged their privacy policies, they know they have a much richer profile of what we're about, and the use of that data is not always going down well with the consumer. So there is a new data pipeline opening up which isn't going through the browser and isn't benefiting Google and Facebook and the big internet players. So that's basically where we're at, and as I say, it's an opportunity for the telecommunications industry because of the way they operate and because of who they are and how trusted they are in most countries. So that's basically the personal data presentation. Has anyone got any questions around that? Shall I go on to the other presentation? Yeah. OTT? This presentation is about again, we're talking about the internet, and we're talking about the big internet players that we call the OTT, over-the-top players. It's a bit of an archaic. Is it an abbreviation you understand, OTT? Have you heard of that before? Yeah. So we're basically talking about all the internet players and what challenge they have laid down for telcos, the traditional telco, and the problems that we have with it, and how we can respond. So we can quickly look at a few familiar challenges for telcos, but you may be aware of these anyway, so I can skim through those quite quickly. The bottom line is that, you know, as you know, mobile connections and broadband, you know, all of these things in not every country, but in a lot of countries, are reaching maturity. Voice revenues are in decline, and you know, even data isn't growing at the speed that we'd necessarily like to see it growing. And so value-added service revenues aren't growing fast enough to meet the decline in voice, and obviously we're also losing money in SMS revenues as well, as you can see here. So global circuit switch voice connections are going up, but revenues are going down. Video traffic is putting incredible pressures on networks. We've got formats nowadays that are, you know, getting up to, if we get up to here, we're getting up to 3 and 5 gigs that, you know, people are wanting to look at. There is a lot of expectation for mobile networks and fixed telcos to actually come up with the goods and make sure that the networks respond, that they're offering quality, that they're offering speed, and that costs. But the problem is they're losing revenue, not losing revenues, but they've got a declining revenue profile. So what can we do about it? Well, you know, we say really that failure isn't, you know, to invest isn't an option, because obviously you've got to maintain your network, and we've got a few examples of here of people that haven't maintained their network, and they've got into a lot of trouble. AT&T got it wrong as far as that's concerned, had lawsuits and lost a lot of money. Netflix share price went down badly when their network messed up, and Vodafone in Australia lost over 500,000 customers when it didn't get the quality of its network right. So, you know, you can't not invest in your network because that's your core service. So it looks, as we say, you know, in the UK, you're stuck between a rock and a hard place. Where do you go from here? So the impact on traditional telcos, yes, there are particular figures that we estimate: 52 billion lost from VoIP, 32 billion lost in 2013. That figure in SMS revenues. Internet consumer services are now a majority are being adopted by the majority of the population. And OTT players and the internet have loosened telcos' customer gatekeeping position. Nowadays, a user engages more with brands on the internet than they do with telco. I mean, quite often, if you ask somebody who are you with on your mobile phone, sometimes they hesitate because actually they're not quite sure. You know, they have to remind themselves. Because when you make a voice call or send an SMS, it's not branded. It's not a branded experience. Mostly what you do on the internet is a branded experience. You're engaged with by Google, by Facebook, by any other social messaging brand, and you know that you're in their domain and you're operating in their features and services. When you use services from telcos, you quite often don't really know, you know, it's not apparent or profiled, highlighted to you when you're using it. So we've spoken about these losses and you know the adoption. And here's a good example of a player in the Netherlands, KPN, the mobile network, and they put out this is actually from a slide deck they produced, which led to a strategy from KPN, which resulted in effectively legislation against, you know, net neutrality legislation effectively took place in Holland, as it has done in Spain and Argentina, on the basis of what KPN were going to try to do, which was to block OTT traffic and such like. Now, if we look, the next thing that perhaps is quite interesting to look at is on the internet there are natural disruptive characteristics. When you're competing with over-the-top internet players, you're not just competing against individual companies, you're competing against the natural characteristics of the internet, which will never change. They will always be like that. And it's very good to understand not just that you're competing with a particular company, but you're competing with a completely different landscape from traditional telecoms. And if we look at some of those different characteristics, I've listed 12 of them in another deck, but I've just got 6 here. And we're looking at, on the top half of this wheel, we've got the internet characteristics, and on the bottom half we've got the traditional telecoms characteristics. And you will see that they're very advantageous to the internet. So if we start off with the first one, the first one, it's the consumer fly in relation to the consumer spider. The consumer on the internet is the product as well as being the customer. So we're being consumed on the internet. The consumer on a telecoms network really is the customer. You know, they're not being used in any other way. They are in the strong position of being a customer who is respected and appreciated. On the internet, as I mentioned earlier, consumers are touched every day by a brand that they're aware of, that they recognise, that they appreciate every day on the internet, many times a day. In the traditional telecoms market, the consumer is relatively untouched by mobile brands. You know, you're not always aware that you're engaging with a mobile brand when you're on the phone making a call. On the internet, there's a lot of free on the internet, and that's a massive threat to the way that generally traditional telecoms work. Because the internet exploits alternative returns to subsidize free. So obviously Google operate an ad-supported system whereby they offer you something free and they sell your data to get higher than market average advertising revenues. As far as the telco is concerned, you don't really exploit, or telecoms don't really exploit alternative returns. If they offer something for free, if a telco offers something for free, it costs them money. Whereas that's not the case on the internet. So that's an enormous difference in characteristics, and a real uphill struggle for telecoms to compete against. We know how low the barriers are on the internet to starting a business, and we know equally how high the barriers are in the highly regulated traditional telecoms market. How unfair that balance is, in that all the VoIP services are not actually regulated in any way whatsoever, but are taking an enormous amount of revenue away from telcos. Interestingly, in Europe, there's some very high-profile things you may well be aware of, where, for example, France has got Skype under their magnifying glass and is considering whether to decide that Skype should be categorised as a telecoms company. And if they were, they would come under all of the regulations of the telco. Now that would be a massive problem for Skype, because the additional costs involved here are absolutely enormous. Very interesting things which are being looked at in France. The other difference is a bit unfair, but very different structures of companies on the internet than there are in the telecoms industry. On the internet, you have small, visionary software entrepreneurs who started the company, who wrote the code, who understand their product brilliantly, who are so in control of their company and their product that they're happy to take risks, much higher risks than the telecoms industry is willing to take. That means they can operate much more quickly than the telecoms industry can. Whereas the telecoms industry is controlled, what economists call the principal agent, i.e. the CEO. They didn't create the services of the product. They are a businessman who is good at what they do and has been promoted or recruited to be a CEO and run a company. But because they don't know the company and the services actually that well, they need a lot of data from everyone and a lot of time to make decisions. That's too slow to compete against the internet. If you're going to compete against the internet, you need to be like them. So sometimes that means, and a lot of telcos are doing this, splitting up or spinning off units to be like telcos, to operate and act like the way they do, to be fast moving, to be agile, to be measured on different metrics. A lot of mobile networks and fixed networks are measuring all the things they do in the same way in terms of return on investment and such like. And that's a completely different way to the way things are done on the internet. Facebook and WhatsApp and all these other, they didn't bother with that. They just bothered with how many users have I got. Because they're likely, they had options for making money. WhatsApp's option may well be exiting and selling themselves for a lot of money to whoever. We thought Facebook was going to do that for a while, but they've been very successful in operating an advertising model. But they're fast moving, and this makes them more agile. They'll take risks, unlike telcos. And telcos have too many responsibilities and too many regulations And the only way of changing that is to pull divisions and even completely new businesses out of a mobile network and out of a telco, and putting them in the internet environment on their own. They may be owned, they may be reporting into a parent company, but they are an entirely internet-based unit of the mobile network. And that's the only way that they can be successful. Telefonica have created Telefonica Digital. They've bought into social networks. Other examples, China Mobile created Fetion very early on, social messaging. It cannibalized their own SMS, but it's got them in early on social messaging. They can grow that business. They can do things with it. You know, on the internet, you can add new features and new software and new services. They've established a new platform on the internet for their company, which a lot of other companies are not doing. And they're just sitting with declining voice revenues and not actually creating the value-added services that are really getting reach and penetration. So let me have a look at, there's a lot of other characteristics that are listed as well. I mean, I've listed 6 here. There's probably about 12 altogether, and they are actually on other slides in the presentation. And they really are a wake-up call, you know, because it's not just that internet companies are for some reason really clever or really good at what they do. They are operating with natural internet characteristics which are just completely unfair in relation to the way mobile networks. I don't mean legally unfair, I mean, you know, not level. It's not a level playing field, and it's important for mobile networks to try and redress that unfair playing field as best they can. If I quickly go through what we call our operating responses, I think you may have had this. Have they had this presentation before? No. We recommend. Sorry, I'm not reading along. Somehow the connection is deciding it doesn't want to work. Sorry. Okay, so there are effectively about 5 main strategies for telcos dealing with the internet threat. And they come down to, you either compete with what's happening on the internet, you partner with companies on the internet, you defend your network, which is a more controversial method or strategy, but has been done. Telefonica and others have done it. You take the view that if you can't beat them, you join them. So you as I said, you develop OTT services yourself, and you put them out on the internet. And the most difficult strategy, which is not a silly one very often, is to wait and see, because there are a lot of companies on the internet, and it's probably more prevalent on the internet than elsewhere, where services are being offered before the consumer is really ready to receive them. One of my presentations, for example, is about mobile TV and about something that Qualcomm did between 2007, 2000 and 2011. 2007 they created Flow TV, mobile TV offering, which was essentially broadcast television on your mobile phone. They closed it in 2011. They spent over $1 billion and the only reason they didn't lose the money is because they bought spectrum, dedicated spectrum for the broadcasting, which they resold at a profit, because spectrum's a very valuable thing. And if it wasn't for that, I think the CEO probably would have lost his job. It is important to wait and see, because it's important to get the timing of your services correct. If we look at some of the things that people have done in different strategies, I've mentioned CMG's Fettion messaging service. They started that quite early, and a lot of other telcos weren't doing this kind of thing because they were still trying to protect their SMS. But CMG made the decision that if they were going to, they were up against obviously 10 cents, so they had a lot. They needed to get in quick to get some market share. They're number 2 in the region, so they've done a reasonable job at keeping their subscribers engaged by using an internet application to do so. Competing has got its place, but it's not always possible. For example, if you're up against a dominating competitor. For example, it's hard to compete with free, and that's when you perhaps need to do other things. You can also partner and facilitate. So you can either bundle your services, you could bundle your services with WhatsApp and offer an improved data package to get yourselves, the telco can, to get extra money, and also keep the customer happy, because the customer actually quite likes WhatsApp and wants to use it. Now, if you ever try to use some social messaging applications, this is probably less so maybe in Asia Pacific, but in some parts of the world, for some reason they don't work that well, and you wonder why that is. But it could be that some of the telcos are doing something to make it to create friction for the VoIP and messaging companies. Protecting and blocking VoIP is not really that popular. Some countries have actually regulated for net neutrality, which makes this illegal. I think it's Argentina. It's one South American country. I think it's Argentina, Holland, and Spain. I believe have legislated for net neutrality, and therefore against a telco blocking the use of voice or social messaging. So it is a controversial strategy, but depending on what's happening in the market, a company may have to do this. If they're being so badly affected by an over-the-top service, then maybe they have to do this because it's not legal in the countries other than the ones I mentioned. It's just not. It's frowned on by the regulators, and obviously, if you degrade the experience of social messaging for your users, that might come back to haunt you. Protect strategy is one that that companies only choose when they really have to. I think that Telefonica tried it because they were testing the water. So they wanted to sort of work out how acceptable it was to their consumers and how acceptable it was to regulators. So they had a go at blocking VoIP and other things, and the result was effectively they did get frowned on by the regulators. The regulators brought them to task about doing it, and they eventually stopped doing it. If you can't beat them, join them. Well, we've already talked about Fettion at CMG, but obviously Telefonica have got to go. KTO's got a hotel. You know, there are a lot of telcos now who are using and creating their own over-the-top services, and that's a really good thing. You know, they should do more of it, and as I say, they should also support that with new organisational design. The ways and see strategy is very difficult to sell, very difficult for telcos to sell to their management. Managers and directors like to see decisions, and going to them and saying we're not going to do anything doesn't normally go down very well. So it's a very difficult strategy, but if you're able to use this strategy, it can stop you from spending a lot of money on a mistake, on a badly timed service, on, you know, maybe you should just let your competitor try it out first before you put your foot in the water. Being the first mover is not always a winning position to take. Wait and see is a very courageous strategy for telcos to take, and perhaps they should do a little bit more of it. I think that's the final slide. You know, the messages really I've listed there, but some of the really important ones are that telcos need to get involved in OTT. They need to act like them. They need to be there. They need to be as much software entrepreneurs as the OTT players are, because they're only going to be able to compete if they have the same kind of vision that the OTT and the internet players have. They need to regenerate everyday customer engagement based on verified consumer use cases. A lot of telcos are running applications of all sorts of different types that try to engage users related to customer service and other things, but they don't really get used. There's no point in a telco creating an OTT service just to tick a box. That's not going to get them anywhere. They need to absolutely only create over-the-top applications and services that really are going to get used. Otherwise, it's a waste of money, and it's not engaging the consumer on an everyday basis. Exploiting OTT weaknesses. International players in OTT are rubbish at what's going on in your country. Whether you're talking games, music, media services, whether you're talking subtleties of a social messaging network, which have different cultural preferences in one country to another. The big international players won't get that. And so telcos have an opportunity to localize their services very strongly, and therefore pick up their local customers much more successfully than an international OTT player. Bundling for telcos is a very, very powerful strategy, and they do it very well. Telcos probably bundle more successfully in terms of protecting their services from competition by the internet than any other industry that I know. And unfortunately often get in trouble for doing that, because it forces, if you like, the user to have a particular bundle of things rather than to have them all split out. But an example in Holland of something that went badly wrong when they got the bundling wrong is KPN in Holland. When they bundled their packages, they missed SMS out and they kept it separate. So SMS was clearly priced separately from the bundles of their other packages. WhatsApp came in and all the users looked at the price of SMS, the price of WhatsApp, WhatsApp's free, and SMS revenues not just declined in Holland, but they completely crashed and were obliterated. And WhatsApp is now one of the biggest, subscriber base in Holland, bar none in Europe. So it's almost saying that telcos need to be able to bundle, because it's a way they can actually defend themselves in a very unfair, unlevel playing field against internet players. Because what they're able to do then is say, we'll give you a batch of SMS for free, and we'll give you this voice, and we'll give you this and this. And as long as that is seen as perceived value by the consumer, then that's fine. But what it doesn't allow the consumer to do is to see the price of the SMS so they can decide which one to buy. If they get forced to do that, then all that will happen is the internet players will come and say, thanks for doing that, we will now take over that market because we're going to offer it free, because it will become obvious that SMS is costing money and the value is no longer there for the user, and the internet players will just walk all over your local telco. So it's quite important in some ways to appreciate the other side of the coin when you're regulating telcos. That what could happen is dominating market power could be even worse with an international telco who comes in and offers things that compete on a free basis, decimating local revenues on mobile networks, and funneling revenues out of the country to an internet giant. So there are dangers in putting too many restrictions on telcos' ability to bundle, I guess. And that's it really. The rest is there, but is not necessarily that important. Thank you very much. Any questions on that area?
Okay, thank you very much.
No, it's a pleasure, absolute pleasure.
Thank you for coming. And
Yeah.
you will come again.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you, Max.
That's okay.